Hello everyone. I'm going to try without the mic because I've got notes in one hand and a dibber in the other, and it's all just going to go wrong. I've got no pockets for anything. If anyone is struggling to hear, please could you wave, and you'll be beckoned down to the 2 empty seats at the front. Great to see so many familiar faces. If you're trying to place me, you probably know me as Kate McLean of the Open Garden on Church Street, or maybe Buxton Methodist Church, or possibly even just simply Mrs. Roddy. But Kate Dixon is my maiden name, which I use professionally. I was born and brought up in Whaley Bridge. I am local, or almost local. Went to school in Manchester and then university in Edinburgh, which is where I met Roddy. I trained as an architect, and I had 5 years in private architectural practice before I took a bit of a change and went to work for an organisation called 21st Century Halls for England, which was a Millennium Commission project funding communities to develop their village halls to get them ready for the year 2000. And that's how I got my introduction to the voluntary sector, the community or third sector. I've called this talk Rescuing Ruins, influenced by the title of a book, How to Rescue a Ruin, which was published in 1989 and was very much a Bible for the Building Preservation Trust movement. Building Preservation Trusts have been around for 100 years or so. Early 20th century there were 1 or 2. Famously, the Landmark Trust was established in 1965, I think. And then after that wonderful exhibition at the V&A about the destruction of the country house, we had, that was 1974 apparently, we had the National Year for Architecture in 1975. And that led to the establishment of something called the Architectural Heritage Fund, with a government endowment of £1 million that could be loaned to community organisations who were trying to rescue ruins. A support network grew up around those building preservation trusts, as they were known, and it was the director of that support network, now known as the Heritage Trust Network, who wrote this book, How to Rescue a Ruin. Building preservation trusts are developers of last resort. They're groups motivated by heritage rather than profit, tackling building projects that are beyond the private sector. In other words, buildings that need more money spending on them than they're ever going to be worth. And those charitable organisations are able to access funding to bridge what has become known as the conservation deficit or the development deficit. So after my stint with the Millennium Commission in 1999, I can't believe it's 25 years ago, I became the first employee of an organisation called Ancoats Buildings Preservation Trust, Ancoats BPT, which was founded to rescue historic buildings in the conservation area of Ancoats, Manchester, a conservation area that had been designated in 1989, so the same date as the book. And these are some of my projects. So we've got some before projects, befores and afters here, of a mill on the left. Oh, I don't know my lefts and rights, by the way, so, you know. I think it's the left. And a church on the right. You can hopefully tell which one's the church. We were a rolling fund BPT, as it was called. The idea was that we would take on the buildings, do them up, and then sell them on. And we'd use the surplus from one building project to fund the staff costs and the development costs of getting the next one on its way. And my role involved cocktailing a large number of grants to cover the conservation deficit. Now, in the case of Ancoats, actually, we were part of an area-wide regeneration project that was ongoing, Manchester planning for the Commonwealth Games, and we worked as agents for something called the Northwest Development Agencies, the regional development agencies, and the Ancoats Urban Village Company, which had been set up by Manchester City Council. So the RDA provided a lot of the funding, and the Urban Village Company helped to find the end users who would take on these buildings that we had shell repaired. So I've got a lesson here. There's going to be a few lessons through the talk. I've got a lesson here. Partnership delivery is key to rescuing ruins. We were a very small trust, but we could punch above our weight because we were part of a partnership that distributed the risk to the partners best placed to manage it. In the case of these buildings, you might have taken a trip into Manchester to the Halle at some point. The church on the right is now Halle St Peter's. That is the home of the Manchester Halle Orchestra that rehearses in that church. And on the left, there's some photographs from the developer, or a CGI image, a computer-generated image, from the developer who took on Murray's Mills and converted it to residential. So we were very successful in Ancoats. And we were invited to extend our remit. It actually became a UK-wide remit. We changed our name to Heritage Works Buildings Preservation Trust, and we started to undertake some projects in North Yorkshire because the Yorkshire RDA liked to have us as a partner. Did some projects in Halifax in particular, and across in Merseyside, Liverpool in particular. There was just a bit of a snag. We were supposed to be the small organisation, the weak link. What we did not expect was that the coalition government would come in and overnight abolish the regional development agencies. And with it went our service delivery contracts. There was also a little bit of a hiccup with the National Lottery, because the principle of the lottery, it was, when it was first founded, to provide a grant to bridge the gap. So the principle of making a surplus was frowned upon. If you made a profit, you didn't need all the grant, you had to pay some of it back. Therefore, we didn't have the funds to roll on to the next project. In 2011, my trustees decided that the business model really didn't work, and the staff team was disbanded. The office was closed. Heritage Works does continue to exist. The trustees are still there. It's on the shelf should the need for it ever arise. But meanwhile, I went on to form Creative Heritage. So we're a private sector consultancy based in Buxton. There's a very small team of employees and a network of associates. You might recognise one of the associates. I would also comment that the smiley people on here, i.e. the women, are the employees, and the slightly more perplexed looking ones, the men, are the associates. One of our USPs, our unique selling points, is that we work equally across the public, private and voluntary sectors. I personally have a few USPs. I can draw on my experience of being a trustee of the Architectural Heritage Fund that I told you about before. I also served on one of the regional committees of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and I'm now a consultant working for them as a mentor for National Lottery Heritage Fund projects. So I'm going to show you lots of projects now from which we will draw lessons. Some of them are ones that I've worked on personally or members of my team have worked on. Others are projects I have simply followed because they were awarded a grant when I was on the grants panel at the Architectural Heritage Fund, and it's just been nice to see what's happened to them. Another reason why you just might know me or know us is that back in 2017, 2018, we delivered a series of visits to the Buxton Crescent while the project was on site. We delivered a small heritage skills programme where we delivered 2 sessions for local tradesmen to try and encourage the white van man to learn a little bit more about heritage skills. 5 construction cottages, 2 sessions for homeowners, potentially some of you, and 5 of the subcontractors on that job helped us with opportunities for people to handle materials and really get close to that most amazing building project. Private sector work is largely around heritage impact assessments. We produce the supporting statements that you need if you're seeking planning permission for a project that might affect a designated asset, as it's called, a listed building, a conservation area or a national park. So the selection here, on the top we've got Great Low Farm. We have recently secured listed building consent for that one. It's on the A515 as you go out of Buxton on the left hand side on the bend. Yes, not quite a ruin, but you know it's trying hard. The middle one, Tariff Street in Manchester, Jackson's Warehouse is a Grade 2 star listed canal warehouse in the middle of the image, and the very large building on the right, we helped to secure planning permission for that. But we did just kind of shift it along a bit so that the warehouse got a bit of a look in or a look out. People from Vision Buxton have just been up to the Cat and Fiddle, to the gin distillery. Yeah, well, we know what one of those looks like because we did Manchester Gin. The Manchester Gin Distillery, which sits in the Arches under GMEX, was one of our heritage impact assessments. And then along the bottom, we've got a couple of ruins. We've got Leg Lane in the jewellery quarter of Birmingham. Done quite a lot in Birmingham because of the industrial heritage connection. The one in the middle is a building near Castleton. It looks like a farm from the distance. It has a farmsteading around it, but it's actually a very old cotton mill. And then the one on the right is not the listed building. We did a rather unusual heritage impact assessment for the extension of Kingsgate House, which has not yet been built, because it might have impact on a very little listed building on the A6. So next time you drive through and you go up Wellington Road and you see Kingsgate House, look immediately after it at the really forlorn ex-bathroom warehouse or whatever it is on the corner. It's a listed building going nowhere. The public sector projects we've been involved in, as Simon mentioned, we do quite a lot of townscape type projects, and also town halls seems to be a bit of a niche where local authorities want to make better use of their town halls for public benefit. So along the top, the wedding cake is Stockport. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, still not moved the front door to where Roddy wants you to move it to, but anyway, we know. He mentions it every time we drive past.
The front.
Or put it back at the front. Put it back at the front. Yeah. The middle one is Nottingham. We had a very good relationship with Nottingham City Council. Carrington Street was a very successful townscape heritage project. The shop which is to let, you can't really see that, but there is a yellow sign in the bottom left-hand corner, was the base for the townscape heritage team for the duration of that project. That's a theme that we'll repeat. On the right, London Mill in Leek was a feasibility study funded by or commissioned by Staffordshire Moorlands, who wanted the private sector to pull their finger out and develop it and wanted us to prove how that might be possible. On the bottom row, Roddy there is consulting with shop owners in Mansfield in an empty shop, that theme. In the middle, industrial dereliction, poor little engine house is the only thing left of Castle Street Mills. It's now the bin store of a new development, which is better than it being lost altogether. We made a case for its survival and reuse. And then on the right is Ashton Town Hall, which is in a bit of a bad way because the council knocked down the 1970s extension and then realised that they'd accidentally knocked down the kitchen, the loos, the boiler plant and everything else. And I was contacted by their head of regeneration who said, could we help? And we said, I said, you need a vision for the building. He said, oh, a vision. How much does one of them cost? So now we come to the third sector. I would have put voluntary sector, but it wouldn't fit on the line. The voluntary sector, community sector, or the third sector. And we do a wide range of projects working with community organisations of all shapes and sizes. We do feasibility studies and business planning. One of my colleagues is an expert in governance and helping people to develop their visions. And we project manage projects on behalf of voluntary organisations. So top left, Markfield Sewage Pumping Station, a beam engine near Walthamstow in North London. Not quite sure why we got that one actually, but we did a sort of feasibility study and business plan and also an activity plan. It's great doing an activity plan. That's a scheme to engage local people with the heritage in their neighbourhood. How do you engage young people with something like that? Sewage and poo, no problem at all. They love it. In that case, there's a skate park in the former silt beds. Tooley's Boatyard in the middle is the one that Simon alluded to. That's in the middle of Banbury, surrounded by rather insensitive retail development. But it's a town undergoing a huge amount of regeneration following the demise of retail with a nighttime economy, and this little complex is in the heart of it. It is the oldest dry dock on the canal network. Up on the right, the children are at the Birmingham Coffin Works. Down in the bottom, Lee Spinners, they needed some help with their governance. My goodness, you don't take on that unless you've got the skills to do it, do you? Oh yes, you do. They needed a bit of sorting out. Macclesfield Silk Museum, they need a bit of sorting out too, but we're helping them there as project managers for their refurbishment project, their major repairs project, which included re-roofing the top floor, re-roofing Paradise Mill, where on the top floor the Silk Museum has its jacquard looms, so incredibly frail timber machinery, and you try and take the roof off over the top of it. And the port sunlight image, I just put that in because I remembered that the introductory spiel had told you that I was going to talk about chocolate box cottages. Actually, I'm not. But we were involved here in developing an asset strategy, an income generation strategy for their non-residential buildings. Port Sunlight Village Trust asked us to look at 16 public buildings, although some of them were complexes actually made up of more than that Lord Leverhulme had built for his factory workers. So the girls' reading room, the boys' reading room, the girls' dining room, the men's dining room, 16 public buildings that were not in full use. 323 garages, too small to get a car in. 8 acres of landscape, I think it's 8 areas of landscape that they hoped might be developed for new residential, and 4 sites where they'd actually demolished heritage buildings and thought they might like to rebuild them. We did tell them we think you've got enough, really. But there we are. Right, let's get a move on. I'm going to flick through these slides very, very quickly. It was mentioned that we've been involved in managing a high street heritage action zone, which of course we've had in Buxton on Spring Gardens over the last 4 or 5 years. So I thought I'd just share a few before and after pictures of our scheme. Now this is an unusual one. There were 68 of these schemes up and down England. 2 of them were run by voluntary organisations, and Fort Ilsley CIC, Community Interest Company, was set up purposefully to run this scheme by 2 local men. And when they got the money, Historic England decided they needed a bit of help from somebody who'd done it before, and we were engaged as project managers. And my colleague Kate, who's sitting in the foreground there with the blue hat on, was the project manager there 3 days a week for 3.5 years, literally on the street at least 1 day a week. This is the cover of the first report, and probably the only report, of the all-party parliamentary group on conservation, places and people. And it's an image that Historic England took, and we happily band it around everywhere because it's got our Kate on the front. You don't have to be called Kate to work for us, but it helps. So I'm going to rattle through some before and after pictures just to give you a bit of a flavour. On this one, on the right-hand image, you might notice that instead of the word cafe, we have a sort of grey ghost sign. Just observe that. This one unfortunately ended up being a bit of a rebuild. I don't think it needed to have been, but it was. Then we decided we need to spread the money a bit further by spending a bit less on each building, and Roddy here led on the design of what we called our shopfront enhancement scheme, which involved just fettling things a bit, to use a Scottish term, to make them look better. That worked particularly well at Wicked Pops. We found an awning company. We have given potters their details, who can repair historic awnings or give you new ones. This was a biggie. In this case, we actually found the old awning was there behind the pen to paper sign, and we're able to get new canvases for it and get it up and running. But as you know, if you've been involved in the High Street Heritage Action Zone here in Buxton, it has 3 strands. They're plaited together. You can't pull them apart very easily. Physical interventions, i.e. the shop fronts, community projects and cultural projects. So in Tyldesley, we, or they, the team of community members, did a traditional street sign project. Because it was a voluntary sector project and because it was able to get up and running even though there was a pandemic going on, which many of the local authorities couldn't do, at the end of each year when there was money left over, Tyldesley were approached to say, can you spend a bit more? And so we had a few little projects up our sleeve that we could spend some money on. And the street sign project was lovely because it involved taking traditional street signs to Dovols, where they were repaired, and we had some more traditional street signs made out of the recycled aluminium centres of car wheels. Fabulous little project. And we brought a group from the community down to watch that going on. Leander don't normally do tours, but they enjoyed doing a tour for us and let people have a go at painting the lettering. And then we went to the Beehive for lunch. It was all very nice. All very nice. All very nice. In the middle, the women with the hats, they did a felting and millinery course inspired by the story of Madame Ratcliffe, a milliner whose shop sign was uncovered below the cafe sign on that very first project. The mural top right, designed by school children. They spotted the motifs on buildings around the town and put those together with an artist. School children were also involved in making tiles and creating the mural, which is a sign at the entrance to the town when you come in off the guided busway. And finally, on the right, Creative Heritage delivered 2 Heritage Skills Markets on Heritage Open Days in adjacent years, where different tradesmen came to show off their wares and encourage people to have a go. The little girl on that one is actually our Kate's daughter. We can't really take pictures of other people's children, but we can take pictures of her. So talking of Kate, what lesson do we learn from Tyldesley? The lesson we learn from Tyldesley more than anything else is the people. More than anything else, it is the project champion, by which I don't mean Kate, although she is an absolute star. I mean Ian, one of the 2 men who first started the project and had that idea to get some money to try and sort out his town. We set up an office next door to Frank's Chippy, the cafe, in a shop front that we did up to be an exemplar. Kate was based there 1 day a week. Ian was based there 5 or 6 days a week when he wasn't literally walking up and down the street. He had already warmed up the property owners before the money came in, so that people who were interested in grant were able to get moving very quickly, put in their applications and get started. And then he also supported local businesses to find premises. They started a market in the market square, and 2 of the traders in the market square have now moved into some of the shops that have been done up. And so this is a project that's really embedded in its community. The local businesses and the residents are very supportive, and I say an absolute star, a champion in Ian. Absolute pain to work with, but well, there you go. Right, okay, I promised you some ruins. Now this is quite a long story. Are we okay with long stories? Yeah. It's quite a complicated one. I'll put my dibber down for a second. Richmond Racecourse Grandstand, this is Richmond, North Yorkshire, sits on top of a hill. That little sort of nipple, there's a few nipples on the skyline on that middle slide there, and they're little buildings associated with the original racecourse, horse racing course in Richmond, on the edge of the town, up a big hill. The building is Grade 2 star listed, built in 1776 for Lord Zetland, who is still a major local landowner. He doesn't own the racecourse, but he owns a lot of the land all around it. And it's generally understood to be the work of John Carr of York. So if it looks a bit familiar, John Carr of York also designed the... Okay, now in 1891 this racecourse closed for financial reasons. It wasn't viable. It was relocated onto flat land. That kind of... who'd have thought it? And then from 1902 to 1941, the building became an isolation hospital for people with infectious diseases, run by the Corporation Sanitary Committee. It was then taken over by the military in World War II, who basically trashed it. And after the war, the grandstand was left disused and suffered from vandalism and decay, exacerbated by the removal and sale of lead from its roof by Richmond Borough Council. In 1969, the Borough Council proposed the demolition of the grandstand on safety grounds, but its application to the North Riding County Council, those are the days, it's all pre-1974 names these, aren't they? The North Riding County Council refused permission for it to be demolished. But with regret, in April 1970, the NRCC Planning Committee, that's a group of men in the top right black and white photograph. If you could get close enough, you could see they're all smiling. They agreed to partial demolition, resulting in the top story being dismantled. Meanwhile, the racecourse land was in the ownership of an organisation called the Burgage Pastures Committee. That had been established back in 1853 with responsibility for the racecourse and the buildings. The Burgage plot owners down in the town, i.e. the wealthy people who'd got a nice big long garden, invested in the Burgage Pastures Committee and received a share of the profits that came from the racecourse. And they rented out the racecourse land for a maximum of 364 days a year for the grazing of sheep or horses or whatever, so that they could clear it for the racing. So it is set in statute, the 1853 Burgage Pastures Act, that the property cannot be rented out for more than a year, and that can only be used for the grazing of horses, sheep and cattle. Now, somewhere along the line, the red line that was drawn around the racecourse became common land, and everything in it is common land, including the buildings. So the buildings can only be used for the grazing of sheep, horses and cattle, and can only be rented out for less than 1 year at a time. Now, eventually, the Burgage Pastures Committee applied to have the buildings taken out of the common land, and all the public authorities agreed that this would be a good idea because they could then try and find a use for those buildings, except for the Open Spaces Society, which objects in principle to development on common land. And they required that the boundaries around the buildings, in addition to this racecourse grandstand, there's a second one owned by Lord Zetland and a little sort of judge's little cubicle for the judge to watch the horses go by. They required that the line around those buildings was drawn so tightly that nobody could extend them or further develop them, because they didn't want huge house extensions and it all being turned into the most super duper mansion or a small estate of houses. So we were landed with the joys of trying to come up with a viable use to repair this building without extending it and without parking a car, and bearing in mind that you have to walk to it across common land grazed by horses, cattle and sheep, dog walking and all the rest of it. We did extensive consultation, and actually we got somewhere with it. The Landmark Trust, I talked about them, founded in 1965. They don't often take on new buildings, but they were actually quite keen on this one and felt that there was a scheme whereby we would rebuild the upper story, perhaps in a more contemporary style than the drawing that you see at the bottom, which is a copy of the original architect's drawing. And it went to their committee, and they were very committed to it and said, depending on how things go over the next few months, it's a possible. What happened in the next few months was they secured funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund for Mavis Bank, one of the most significant derelict country houses in Scotland. And all their efforts are going into Mavis Bank, and probably quite rightly. But unfortunately, that left this poor thing without a use. So consolidation as a ruin is the best we can do for this, but there's no grant funding available for that. So I'm afraid the Burgage Pastures Committee are landed with this, and I suspect the building today is the same as it was when I saw it 2 years ago, and the same as it's been for the last 20 years. So some lessons from this one. The importance of a clean title. Don't take something on if the legals are anything like as complicated as that. You must have land with it on which to add value. And timing is absolutely everything. And that'll come up a few times in the rest of the talk. So sorry, that was a bit of a long one. This one's story is not much better. This one actually started off as a Heritage Works Buildings Preservation Trust project, and it was one of the reasons actually why we decided to disband the trust, because this project was unsuccessful in securing its lottery funding. It's an 1896 Carnegie Library owned by Liverpool City Council. Bear that in mind, councils as owners. They built a new library half a mile away, but hadn't thought about what they would do with this one when they emptied it. That unsuccessful lottery bid that led to closing of the Heritage Works office meant that the trustees revisited the scheme to try and make it cheaper, to see if they could ask for less grant, to see if it would stand more chance if they'd asked for less money. And what they decided to do, I was not around at the time, as you know, I'd been made redundant, I set up my new business. What they decided to do was omit from the scheme a new build element that should have been on the far end. You're looking at the tip of a building that's on a triangular site. Used to be 2 streets with proper buildings both tacked on each side that had long since been demolished. There's a bit of green space and car parking, and our plan had been to build an extension that would have the lift and the stairs and things to cope with all the difficult levels within this building, but also some office accommodation that could be rented out to create an income stream. The end use was to be the new home for an arts organisation, a well-established arts organisation in Liverpool, and therefore the trust would do up the building and the arts organisation would take it on and would run it. That seemed to work. They reduced the ask, they got the money, and then they needed a project manager to manage it, and I was successful in winning the tender to take on that project. It wasn't easy, actually. I thought it was a dead cert, but it wasn't easy. I won it. Don't know why I fought so hard for it, but there we are. Because part way through what's called the development phase, where we were working up the proposals, the arts organisation pulled out. Because I realised that without that new build element, without the offices, they weren't going to create the revenue stream that would enable them to maintain it and run their operations. So Heritage Works needed to find significant other money in order to put that new build element back in, and basically there wasn't time before the lottery offer ran out. Timing again. I gather that a couple of other community organisations have since tried to do something with this building, but have not been able to make it work, and it continues to deteriorate. So the lessons we learned from this one: you have to have a viable business plan, and you have to be able to draw in funding from lots of different sources. You can't just rely on the lottery. Right, North Yorkshire again. This is a listed mill complex near Aysgarth Falls in North Yorkshire. I'm talking about the mill at the back of the image, the tallest one at the back, owned by a private individual and run as a museum cum bric-a-brac emporium. She had actually owned the whole site, but over the years had sold off all the bits and the car parking and the mill yard and all the bits that went with it. So it's just the mill left, no land around it. And she wasn't making enough money from selling bric-a-brac to keep it in good condition. And the council was very worried because the stone slates were slipping down the roof. And down below, the building in the foreground had become a cafe and had an outdoor cafe area. So there was a big risk of stone flags sliding off and hitting the people on the floor below. As I mentioned, there was no land around the mill because she'd sold it all off. So there was no car parking. She was probably trying to sell it, but had put a very high price on it. Nobody was interested because they couldn't make it work, because without car parking you can't convert it to anything. So the National Park Authority funded a study to see whether Richmondshire Buildings Preservation Trust, there's lots of them all over the country, to see whether Richmondshire BPT could develop a viable proposal with a view to the park using its compulsory purchase order powers to kick out the owner and give it to the trust. And we were commissioned to do a proposal for it, a feasibility study for it, and following consultation what we came up with was a scheme whereby Yorkshire Dales Visitor Centre would move out of the car park on the opposite side of the river into this building, and the Yorkshire Dales Authority would lease some of its car park area to the mill, which was then on the upper floors going to be a holiday hostel or holiday lets, accessible holiday lets. I know it sounds strange upstairs, but on a level once you came up the lift. Because in Yorkshire there are lots and lots of little cottages you can rent, but it's very difficult if you need one without stairs and things. That process, with critically, a hydroelectric power station behind, power from the mill laid running behind, which the existing owner had tried to make work but wasn't functioning. So that process whereby the Park Authority funded the study for the Building Preservation Trust to come up with a good idea so that the Park Authority could start the process of CPO, as we call it, actually did the trick. The owner decided that she was going to get compensation value only for it and she better sell on. She sold on quite quickly to a private developer, and our planning application has gone in for a scheme that's actually remarkably similar to what we had suggested, and the roof has now been repaired. So sometimes all you need is a change of ownership. Right, this is another one that got away. Poor old Richmondshire Building Preservation Trust decided that if they couldn't do the mill out at Aysgarth, perhaps they could tackle this school in their town centre. Now this is a very similar story to Everton Library. The school became empty when a new school was built half a mile away. And of course the county authority hadn't decided what to do with the old school. They actually passed it on to the borough council, because as well as this old building there were some new classrooms which the borough council was able to use as offices, so that was good, but this building was empty and deteriorating. Richmondshire CVS, that's Community Voluntary Service Organisation, actually were the ones who went to the lottery, and they got a development grant to try and do this up to be their new offices and facilities. But unfortunately, A, they hadn't applied for enough money from the lottery, and B, their own core funding fell away, so they couldn't take it forward. And the Building Preservation Trust therefore had a crack at it. We were appointed as project managers and we helped to undertake condition surveys and all the rest of it, and discovered quite soon that the repair costs for this building were far higher than the CVS had ever anticipated. There was a considerable community interest in it becoming a community hub. The business case based on there being the large meeting rooms like the old dining room that you see there for rent, but also a holiday hostel, back to that affordable accommodation thing that we were talking about, accessible and affordable accommodation, some co-working office space and a cafe. Unfortunately for this one, the lottery round 2 application was unsuccessful because the lottery felt that that business plan wasn't sufficiently profitable. We'd purposely tried to make it as lean as possible so that hopefully we would do better than that, but at least we could show it could break even at worst case, and they thought the worst case was worst case, and so they were not supportive. But actually we were at the mercy of timing. This project went to the National Lottery Committee for the North, the first meeting of the Committee for the North after 12 months, and the Committee for the North was merged. The North West, the North East and Yorkshire regions all came together. There was 12 months of pent-up desire for lottery funding across the whole of the North, and the project that got the money was the Blackpool Winter Gardens. So none of us stood a chance really. It's still like that, and there's now a new unitary authority got landed with it, so I don't know, it might come back to the Building Preservation Trust to have another go. But the lessons I learned from this one is firstly that robust business case, secondly being able to draw on a wide range of funding streams so that they could have demonstrated that they just weren't relying on the lottery entirely. But also to be aware that you have to run quickly and get your whole jigsaw in place before one of the bits falls off. However, in happier news, the whole reason why Richmondshire Buildings Preservation Trust was looking for a new project was that this was one they had finished 10 years previously. And I'd actually been involved in that when it very first got started. They had a grant and a loan from the Architectural Heritage Fund, and way back then I was a bit of a mentor to help them get it started. Though I don't know what I could teach them. I'm really impressed with these guys. So the project's been up and running for over 10 years. It's a former station, large cafe restaurant at the end of a cycle track. Within it, there are a number of units that they rent out to a microbrewery, a bakery, there's a dance studio there, and a 3-screen cinema there. Now, initially, all the spaces within the building were rented out to private enterprises, and the trust just took the rent. During COVID, the cafe operator actually went bust, and the trust decided that they would run it themselves, and they are doing a fantastic job of it. They had money in the bank to refurbish it, and they're doing a fantastic job of it. A very, very able group. The lessons I learned from it, a really strong board of trustees, and they're really quite strict at their rotation. So they change every 3 years, 6 years, and you get new ideas, fresh impetus, people prepared to go and find more funding, try new things. And a robust yet flexible business model. Sticking with stations, here's one that came across my desk when I was on the grants panel of the Architectural Heritage Fund. It was secured a grant, and I've been interested in it since then. I recently had to kill time in Levenshulme. You don't need to know why. And it was Roddy here who said, why don't you go along to the station and see how it's doing? So fortunately last week I was able to take you some new photographs. This one has been taken on by the new breed of BPTs. As I mentioned, the word preservation has kind of gone out of fashion. They are now heritage development trusts, very largely. It's what they prefer to be known as. And that means they're kind of closer to the community development trusts and the DTA and the sort of civic movement. They're actually closer to you guys, the civic associations, than they are to the old heritagey guys, because these organisations are motivated more by meeting a community need than necessarily the heritage of the building, which does present some problems. Purists like me who get a bit worried about what they're trying to do to their listed buildings, but it means they're very much motivated by meeting the needs of the community. This one is a destination, I'm quoting here from their website to an extent, a destination cycle cafe, bar, workshop, urban garden and community hangout in Levenshulme on the A6. It was in 2017 that a group of local residents formed the Station South CIC, Community Interest Company, to prevent the former railway station from decaying beyond repair. The station itself had closed in 1958. The line continued as a goods line for a decade or so more, but when that closed, it took until the 1990s for the Friends of Fallowfield Loop to campaign for that to become a cycle path. Meanwhile, over the top, the old station became a hardware store, a furniture shop, a TV shop, a bit of a cash and carry, and was really becoming rather empty and derelict by 2016. But that group, the Station South CIC, developed an inspiring vision for giving the station a new lease of life in a way that would serve the people of Levenshulme and beyond. Their funding strategy started with a crowdfunding campaign, and over 1,000 individuals contributed. And you know, Levenshulme's not the wealthiest part of South Manchester by any means, but they also have grant funding, an Architectural Heritage Fund grant and an Architectural Heritage Fund loan. The bike station in the middle at the bottom is effectively a commercial bike repair shop. They run women in the workshop maintenance sessions so that women can get to maintain their bikes, and they have a free borrow a bike or trike session on the last Friday of every month, and they're trying to encourage people to cycle safely and maintain their bikes well. The cafe is also a music venue and hosts exhibitions, and the garden is a cafe overspill with community events and markets and so on. So the lessons here: viable business plan, track record, based on meeting local needs and a strong community social enterprise. These guys may be voluntary, but they're not amateur. Same for Loughborough. I'm the mentor for the National Lottery Heritage Fund here, Loughborough College of Technology, 1937 generator hall. Attached to a classroom block on the top right, the brick buildings, was workshops for people to learn trades, a traditional college of technology. It became part of Loughborough University, surplus to requirements, so the university went through a tender exercise to find a private partner to take it on. But the project needed a grant to make it stack up. The private sector partner couldn't get access to that grant. They have created workspace in the former classrooms, which is nice. It's a mixture of crafts and creative industries, as they're called, digital industries. And there's an independent cafe on the ground floor, a bakery, which links into this large hall. The generator CIC is now developing this. It's just started on site as a community art space for performances, rehearsals. There's a cinema club, exhibitions, wedding and party venue. They've got it all in mind. Key to this has been their partnership with the university, who've basically given it to them, but also given them lots of help with the professional fees and things, and the local authority. And the local authority has written this into its regeneration strategy for the town centre of Loughborough as part of their initiative to revitalise their high street. It's had High Street Heritage Action Zone funding and significant town deal funding through the government's regenerating high streets agenda. So the lessons on this one is about partnership more than anything else. Partnership with the private sector, because it's a win-win. They get this off their hands, but they also have their cafe used in the evenings for hopefully for the weddings and so on, and with the local authority. We're nearly there, chaps, nearly. Liscard Library, never been, love to go. It's another social enterprise project funded by the Architectural Heritage Fund. This one is a story of an existing organisation taking on a heritage building to meet community needs. The Real Ideas organisation is not motivated by heritage whatsoever, but this is the third heritage building that they have taken on in order to deliver their services to the community. Liscard Library. This is a John Passmore Edwards funded. It's not a Carnegie, but similar sort of idea. 1896. The Real Ideas organisation, apologies again, I'm slightly reading from their website. It's an award-winning social enterprise that works to solve problems and create positive and lasting social change. They took the lead in this project when the council decided that this library was probably one that they needed the voluntary sector to take forward. This is part of the Cornwall devolution thing. They did provide funding for it. And when the project was complete, they also provide the books. Rather fewer books than it originally had. There are only 4,000 books in this library. However, there are 5,500 books taken out every month. There is more churn in this library than there ever was before. In the first year of opening, it opened in September last year after its £1.5 million renovation. Just under 65,000 people went through that library. The town only has 9,500 people in it, so people are visiting many, many times. There have been 2,000 new library members since this organisation took it on. Fewer books, more places to read them. You can read them out on the roof terrace if you want. You can read them in the garden. You can read them in the cafe. And alongside the library, there are meeting rooms, workspace and studio spaces available to hire, for events and meetings, and that cafe. And importantly, this is where Real Ideas delivers its youth engagement project, which helps young people to build in confidence and support them onto the next stages of their lives, be that into education or employment. It's where they run digital inclusion workshops, where anyone can go in to get help with their computer. So if, like me, you were struggling to get your driving licence renewed online, you can just toddle along there and somebody will help you with it. You won't be surprised to know it's because I've got two names that cause a problem with a government ID. And pathways, which, well, you don't need to know about all the things they're doing. Just be inspired by it and think about it when it comes to the context of libraries close to us. So the lessons learned here, this was an existing organisation with a significant track record, already delivering contracts on behalf of the public authorities. So a good revenue stream coming in because of the work that they do, which has enabled them to run a library entirely voluntarily. There are lots of people who like to volunteer in libraries, who love sorting books and putting them on the shelves in the right order. Go on, put your hand up. Who would like to volunteer in a library? No, don't go there. Right, moving on to Canada House, another story of an organisation or a project looking for a home, and my goodness, this is a big home. This is a civic building in the centre of Sheffield, Grade 2 star listed, built in 1875 for the officers of the Sheffield United Gas Light Company, who really wanted to impress people. Designed by architects Hadfield and Son. So that great big hall on the left is where you would take your gas meter in to have it read. In the middle is the boardroom where the directors of the United Gas Company would meet. And they wanted to show off, didn't they? But following nationalisation, I'm afraid, this became rather surplus. It was a gas showrooms briefly for a while, but was vacated in 1972, whereupon it was bought by a businessman who didn't have the funds to look after it. So we're getting that story about owners who haven't got the resources to look after it. It became a cash and carry, a nightclub, but in increasingly poor condition, until eventually it was purchased by the public sector as part of the regeneration of Sheffield for the student games. This is right by where the tram goes crashing towards the station and Park Hill, and you've got the student games centre. And they needed this to look a bit better. So English Partnerships, which is the mother of all those RDAs that got abolished, they funded a comprehensive repair project. All seemed great. Became a Chinese restaurant on the ground floor, one of those eat as much as you like buffets for a place. And Panache House. That may not have a chime to anybody here, but Panache are that rather large lingerie company, luxury, large size. Oh yeah, the lady here on the front, yeah. Well, some people might know about it. If you need larger sizes, try Panache. But they made so much money, they've actually moved out of this building and it's become vacant again. Meanwhile, a partnership of the Sheffield Music Academy and the Sheffield Music Hub, which delivers peripatetic teaching, was looking for a centre for young musicians where they could come together to rehearse, to perform, and so on. And they needed a heritage statement because they wanted to check out with the local authority whether they would be able to get planning permission for what they wanted to do. And because it was Grade 2 star listed, they needed a heritage statement. They had funding from the Architectural Heritage Fund for that, and the Architectural Heritage Fund very kindly said there are some consultants over in Buxton that might be able to help you with this. So we won the contract to research this building and to help them to get their list of building consents. They, feeling comfortable that they were going to be able to do what they wanted to do, managed to raise 1.6 million through Sheffield City Council from government levelling up funds in order to buy this building. So they are now the proud owners of what is going to be called Harmony Works. The two organisations came together and formed a new CIO, Charitable Incorporated organisation, and they're now in the process of applying, or they have put in their applications and they're waiting for the outcome of applications to the Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund, for grant towards a £14 million school scheme. And we've been their heritage advisors every now and then when they remember. And we wrote their conservation management plan. I didn't, my colleague Anna wrote their conservation management plan. So this is an example of a project looking for a home. The best thing when you're doing a feasibility study is find somebody who wants to move house and move in. And this is a project that was looking for a home, but it's also an example of partnership working. If you go on their website and look at the list of organisations that they acknowledge, there's the council, obviously, the universities, Sheffield Cultural Collective, Brass Bands England, Music in the Round, and then they've got their funders from the Architectural Heritage Fund through it goes on and on and on. A huge, massive enterprise. This is not easy stuff. So shall we look at something a little easier? I don't propose to talk about any of these, but just in case you don't know where they are, top left is at Buckingham. In the middle we have the Dome. Top right we have Hardwick Hall at the back of Peak Buildings, which is where the Green Man currently lives, but as you know they are closing in December. And on the bottom we have the Bedford. The Bedford and the Buckingham, I took a quick photograph and I was just standing at the traffic lights. Oh, and I took the Portland as well actually. And then the Town Hall in the middle and the Art Gallery and Museum. Now, I'm not going to comment on all of these about how we might tackle them, but I just want to bring together some of those lessons we've been learning this evening. Do you notice I'm wearing my sort of school mommy pinafore? Oh yeah, somebody here knows my sister. My sister's a head teacher. I'm not a teacher. There's no such thing as difficult buildings, only difficult owners.
Dogs.
Did we all hear that comment? No. That's the same with dogs. Don't make it up. Try and find somebody who wants a home. You have to have a viable business case based on meeting community needs or market demands. Don't think about running a public service unless you know how to do it. It needs experience and it needs credibility if people are going to invest in you. You need strong governance. You need to have the vision. You can't buy it. You have to have deliverable aims. You have to have the skills. Your organisation is independent and community-led. You are not the mouthpiece of the RDAs or the local authority. You're a community organisation and it has to be sustainable. It can't be totally reliant on grant funding. Our Duke of Rutland and his grandstand sort out the legals and the egos. Another of my little mantras, partnerships. The suppression of mutual hatred in the pursuit of grant funding. And perhaps one of the most important ones of all is that you have to have a project champion. One person to drive it, because one person with a passion is worth more than 40 who are merely interested. And my final slide, which is probably the one that is actually most relevant for Buxton, how to rescue a ruin. Don't let it become a ruin in the first place. This one's been in continuous use since 609. Loose fit, long life. Thank you.